Hello, and welcome to the East-West Hollywood Woodwind Library. I'm David Earle, and I'm going to take you through this deep and vast woodwind library. Now, it's kind of funny to say that, woodwind library, because most of the time woodwinds are sorely overlooked in orchestral composition these days for cinematic scores. The upper tones of the woodwinds are very, very important, and I think that Doug Rogers and Nick Phoenix really understood this when they were making this library. The families of the woodwind instruments are very well represented, from the flutes to the clarinets to the double reed instruments. They are all very well represented here, and there are tons of heavy scripts and articulations to choose from. This library was created and co-produced with Tom Bergerson from Two Steps of Hell and engineered by Sean Murphy. Sean's an Academy Award recipient, and he's worked in a lot of A-list movies. The quality in this library really shows, and I very much enjoy that they placed just as much attention into the woodwinds as they did on the strings and the brass and the percussion when they were making this particular series. These instruments are not only playable, they're also inspirational. The Hollywood Library includes 145 gigabytes of 24-bit 441K samples. Now, in this video, I want to give you a proper introduction to this library and show you why it's so special. Let's have a look inside the browser. In the browser, I can see the 13 different folders, and these are all the families of woodwinds between flutes and clarinets and double reeds. Inside the folders, you'll find subfolders. Long for long articulations, short for short articulations. Effects are going to be special effects that are created just by that instrument, key switching, and legato. As we go through these folders, some of them will be slightly different, but in general, they follow the same layout. It's going to be very important that you check out the nomenclature of each of these settings. In this particular instrument, alto, flute, sus, non-vibrato, vibrato, full, niente, that's about as long as the name's going to get. So let's talk about what this means. Sustain means the note's going to sustain as long as you hold it. NV, no vibrato, VB, vibrato. That's going to be controlled by the mod wheel. I know this because when it says full, we actually have control, separate control over vibrato and expression. Niente means that we can actually bring this instrument down to almost nothing. So you should get into the documentation and become very familiar with why these are named the way they are. It is definitely not arbitrary. Now, let's look at the player. On the left-hand side, we have the system settings, MIDI port, channel, transposition, velocity minimum, velocity maximum, voice limiting, and then bit depth. If you have the Diamond series, you can select between 24-bit and 16-bit samples. At the bottom, we see this envelope. This is an amplitude envelope that we can use to augment the sound. We can actually change how the sound behaves, its volume pattern will behave. In the middle, we have all of the articulations. So in this particular instrument, we have sustain, non-vibrato, vibrato, and release. How we travel between these different articulations is determined by all of that nomenclature that I talked about in the patch. On the right-hand side, we have a stereo doubling effect, which basically will widen the sound and put it in the left and the right side. Reverb, these are a ton of impulse responses that are given to you when you get the play engine, and you can choose between any of them and add that to this instrument to add realism. Below that, you have a mixer for the microphones. So the microphones in the Diamond library, you get close mics, mid mics, main mics, surround mics, or vintage mics. All of these mic positions are very well laid out in the literature, and you should definitely check it out. You can turn on these various mics just by clicking on them, and that loads them right in. You can pan, you can adjust their volumes, and you can mute. You can also adjust where they're going to go. If this is set up as a multi-out instrument, you can send each mic group to a separate output. On the right-hand side, we have our master channel. Gives us our channel source, master tuning, we have coarse tuning and fine tuning, panning, overall volume output, mute, and solo. On the left-hand side, these performance scripts were something I was going to wait on. I know you saw me pass by them. Well, round robin reset. So round robin is when you hit a key twice, it won't play the same sample twice, if that's built into the patch. When you hit round robin reset, it goes back to the default first sample to be played. Monophonic true legato is a legato setting for specific instruments that use this specific type of script for legato playing. It will change the instrument from polyphonic to monophonic, and using a complex set of scripts, play things in a legato fashion. So certain notes will slur to each other. It'll detect how you're playing and then try to create a legato that matches it perfectly. Now you can use monophonic true legato with any instrument, but you'll want to experiment a bit. Legato simulation. If you have an instrument that is not really made for legato, but you want it to play legato, the legato simulation is very, very interesting. It basically will create parameters around the sound to emulate velocity layers and things like that to make something play legato. It'll actually create slurs and create portamento and things like that to make it realistic. And that can be very handy. Repetition sim. Let's say that you don't have round robin and you want to be able to use repetitions and not have it sound like you're hitting the same sample every time. Well, you can turn on the repetition sim and it will create all of the little variances and randomizations in the sound to make sure that it doesn't sound like you're hitting the same sample twice. Finally, portamento simulation. When you go from one note to another, it'll create a slide in pitch. Okay, now that we have all that together, let's check out some of the sounds in the library. When I first opened this library, I was excited because there were certain instruments that I don't normally get to see in woodwind libraries. Like I said before, woodwind libraries can be grossly underserved, and in this case, they really did a great job at East West trying to make sure that we got everything we needed. The alto flute is a very, very interesting instrument, and it's fun to write for. In this case, the alto flute, I'm using that patch that has the non-vibrato, vibrato, full, and niente to show you how to use that. So on the alto flute, if I hide play for a moment and open up the piano roll editor, I can see that I have modulation data, and the modulation data is controlling the vibrato. And over here on my controller, I have an expression channel. So that's controller 11. I'm going to use controller 11 while it's playing to show you how it plays along with the vibrato. So in real time, I was creating expression changes, and I can write those into that region. So check it out. Open the piano roll editor, there's modulation, and there's my expression. In the full patches that you see within the Hollywood Woodwind library, the separation between the mod wheel and controller 11 is really pretty cool and offers a lot of expression. I highly recommend getting into it. Another great instrument that can be underserved is the bass clarinet. In particular, I really like this bass clarinet short round robin because it shows off how round robin can sound very realistic. Check this out. Now, in that one, I wasn't hitting the same note twice. I'll re-trigger the same note over and over again so that you can hear the effect. So it never gets that effect that we call machine gunning, which is where you hear the same sample being played over and over again. Now, the mod wheel isn't just used for volume and vibrato and things like that. It can also be used to change the lengths of certain notes. This particular passage, I have short notes, and then I have sort of medium length notes, and then I finally have a sort of sforzando. So that's all built into one patch. And if I open up the piano roll editor again and hide play, you can see there's the expression at the very end when I had that sforzando thing going on. And then there is my modulation pattern. So basically the really short notes are going to be below 70, and then above 70 I have my longer notes. And then if I go up to 127 here, don't know exactly what the range is here, but this will give us this articulation. Kind of like how we would normally use key switching. One of the greatest things about the Hollywood library is the use of legato. So in this particular case, I have this legato bass flute. Bass flute is another instrument that you rarely get to write for and rarely see in libraries, but it's done really well in this library, and I think they took great care in making sure that we had a very playable, very expressive instrument. Just beautifully done. Getting into our bassoons, what I really love about this particular bassoon patch, it uses legato, and at the same time it has an attack at the front end of it. So it sounds very articulate, and it's a lot of fun to play. Expression means that it's going to have a little bit of vibrato at the end. Really beautiful stuff. In this library, the effects that you use are very important as well. They have runs built into it. They have special articulations and extended techniques that are really great. So the bassoon runs. Those can be really handy in the middle of a piece, right? Getting into our clarinets, we also have these things called slur runs. The slur runs are fantastic because you're able to play the instrument very, very quickly, but you still hear the articulation of the instrument. So it never gets lost. It doesn't sound like a bunch of mush. Another instrument that's hard to get in a library and have it done well is the contrabass clarinet. I just love that. So check this out. This is the E-flat clarinet. This clarinet's in a slightly different range from the other normal, or the most commonly used clarinet, the B-flat clarinet, and it has this beautiful reedy presence and it makes for wonderful melodies. Listen to how expressive this instrument is. That particular kind of strident tone is so beautiful, and it cuts right through a mix. We also have English horn. In this particular English horn, it has a key switch available to it, and I'll show you what those key switches do. So I'll play the same line. You can see the key switches down below, and as I play through them, it's changing the articulation. Giving you a wide variety of sounds on a single track. All right, getting into the flutes. This is just a beautiful flute patch, right? One thing in particular that I love about the flute tones in this, and you'll see that this is another one of those full patches where we get control over vibrato and expression at the same time, is this flute sounds really rich and dark and warm even when you play it in a high register, which can sometimes be hard to find. One of the fun things that you'll find in these Hollywood orchestras is the special extended techniques. So in this particular one, we're singing into a flute while we're playing it. So that's kind of fun, right? The oboe. One of the most expressive instruments in the orchestra. Really beautiful for melodies. And when you have a playable oboe, you can get some great things out of it. Now, one of the reasons that I picked this oboe is because it's using slur. You can hear that as it passes between notes, especially in large intervallic jumps, it has that little slur in there, which really lends reality to it and sounds very expressive and emotional. When we get into the piccolo, I'm going to use an extended technique called flutter, where you're fluttering your tongue while you play it. Wonderful extended technique. Another example of how they're using extended techniques in this library. The use of slur in that, and also including the full and niente. I'm not actually pulling this down in expression at all, but you can hear how that piccolo, it's very high, but it's not shrill. And when it plays those little ornaments, they sound very realistic. And that's what I love about this library, is the fact that it's so expressive and so emotional and so realistic. And it's the backbone of all of my orchestral compositions. So now I'd like to show you a demo of the woodwinds playing a piece that shows off how this sounds when they're all playing together at the same time. Thanks for joining me through this library, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Ciao.